Welcome back to the Security on Happy Hour, where we bring together a group of security professionals and naturally cheery folks to discuss topics in the cybersecurity community, share knowledge, learn, teach, and exchange ideas. Before we get started, it's important to point out that the views and opinions expressed on the Security on Happy Hour and related websites are those of the hosts, guests, and authors, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any one company. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about security training and security champion programs. Lisa Bradley, Katie Noble, Crob, and I are joined today by Tania Ward. Tania oversees the security training and security champion program at Dell Technologies. And in this role, she strives to put security in the hands of Dell's development teams. She cultivates a culture of security across the company by increasing secure development knowledge and the adoption of security best practices. Now, prior to this role, Tania worked in the PSIRT team, where she revamped the vulnerability response program and instituted company-wide KPIs. She also participated in establishing the PSIRT and the multi-vendor coordination frameworks from first.org. Tania is from Northern Ireland and moved to the United States to join Microsoft, where she spent just over 14 years working on a multitude of different products, such as SQL Server, Windows Live, and Microsoft Office. Currently, Tania co-chairs the Safe Code Training Working Group, as well as the Trusted Computing Vulnerability Response Team. She considers herself a responder at heart, whether it's volunteering as an emergency medical technician for her local ambulance service or ski patrolling as part of the National Ski Patrol. Welcome to the show, Tania. Good to see you again, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Crob?
I was wondering, and I'm going to rebrand this right now. So, Dell, you're changing the name tomorrow. But I want to know who or what are these security wizards or champions? You could call them champions. But who are these people?
Well, these people are people that were like wizards. Super capes around, and they're superheroes. No, in honesty, to kind of understand who they are, let's kind of step back to the overall business models, right? So security champions traditionally sit or exist within hybrid models where you would have a security team that oversees policy, standards, procedures, and they have all this stuff that they need to get done. But obviously they can't scale, so they have representatives in these different engineering teams that will then take those standards and policies and kind of make sure that they get instituted throughout their engineering team. But there is many types of different champions. So it really comes down to the type of security problem you're trying to solve or that the business is trying to solve. And so, for example, if you want to build security into your product or application, you're going to need a security champion that is typically development focused. So that's my area of passion, is developers, because these champions are not auditors, they're not policemen, they're not there to say, are you doing security right now? Do it. But they're very much about, responsible for driving to make sure that these secure development practices that are instituted in these standards and policies and procedures, or whatever it may be, really kind of get implemented so that our customers at the end of the day can get products and applications that they can depend on to put in their own infrastructure. And so one key call out here is that it's really about, these champions are very much about guiding their development teams to be able to do security activities on a day-to-day basis. And you know why? Security experts are not going to, scale, right? So they can only give, or they may only have limited or restricted availability, right? So whereas these champions will be around for
kind of like a security spirit animal for the development team.
Yeah, except they wear a cape because they're superheroes.
I'm always thinking about Incredibles, and they say not to wear a cape because they
okay, well then they're not.
And it does say no capes.
No capes, but superheroes. I'm good with superheroes.
I look great in spandex.
I guess it sounded like, so we were just kind of talking about scalability a little bit, and it sounded like you kind of maybe started to hit on the question that I was going to ask, which is, why would an organization want to have a security champion program?
Oh my goodness, why? So many reasons, Katie, so many reasons, right? I think if you just kind of look at the market right now, I think there's a lot of different numbers running around, but a lot of it's to do with the lack of skilled professionals that can come in and actually make sure that security is kind of embedded in and integrated in, right? So now you think about the economies of scale, right? So you have a limited amount of folks who have that experience, or a limited amount of folks that have that security knowledge. And so everyone, all these vendors are competing over them. So it helps you actually, instead of turning to get, you know, skilled folks coming into the company, you can actually build it out yourself, right? And meet your own demands. But the other one is obviously scaling across the company. So if you think if you ship over, say, 1,000 different products, or even 1,000 different applications, right? Having a security champion in these teams, right, that can actually see things end to end, just helps you scale out your program way more, or your security program. Number one. And number two, these individuals actually understand the culture of their team, right? They understand their development processes. They know if it's agile, waterfall. They know they know who the leaders are. They understand the business. So they're in a better position to really make comprehensive decisions, right, on behalf of their business unit, except with that security flavor. And the other thing is, as well, with these folks being embedded in, they also can help change that perception of security, right? Like, security is so hard, it's so difficult, I can't ship because I have all these check gates. It takes that kind of, that preconceived idea away, right? And then the other one, if we really want to be serious and kind of really look at the big picture, look, we're all here, right? Because, you know, our companies make money, they sell something, right? And if security breaks, the business breaks, right? So when we look at it from that view, you know, you look at, if you get a whole bunch of, you know, vulnerabilities being reported in your product nonstop, that obviously sends the wrong message to your customers, right? Because they're literally relying on these, you know, what they're taking from their suppliers to be secure when they're putting them into their infrastructure. But the other piece to that also is not just about the vulnerabilities, it's about customer escalations, right? They want to know whether, you know, the things that they're buying is safe enough to put in their infrastructure, right? To avoid breaches and things like that. So yeah, no, there's a lot of different reasons for why companies and individuals should implement a security champion program. Those are just a few.
And
Well, many.
how do you go about getting a security champion program off the ground? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of companies that don't have these programs, and there's probably a lot of challenges along the way.
No, I mean, again, it kind of, I think the most important thing is really trying to understand the problem you're trying to solve, right? And the most important part is making sure that you have executive buy-in, right? If you don't have that top-down approval to kind of, or somebody that sponsors the program, it's really hard to implement it, right? And, you know, and so once you get that level of executive buy-in, then it's really important to make sure that you recruit the right set of individuals, right? If you are trying to get a developer to do the job, right, and you want them to understand how to, you know, adopt and drive and kind of help guide their teams in secure development practices, you're not going to go and get a program manager to do it, right? And I've seen in talking to many different folks in the industry, it can't be about somebody making sure that something gets done. While it's important, it's not as important as making sure that it gets done correctly, right? So recruiting the right individuals, having the right skills, and then defining that operational model, which, I mean, there's obviously, you have to know how to enroll them, you have to know how to enable them, right? You have to keep them engaged and grow their skill sets. Then there has to be some level of reward and recognition, right? And then I think most importantly is always, you know, it's kind of like a heartbeat, maintaining the pulse of the community to make sure that you don't have attrition going in and out, and that they're being fulfilled in the tasks that you've assigned them, but they also at the same time find it rewarding, right? Kind of some tips that I've learned along the way from just talking to many different folks in the industry is it's best to kind of start small, right? Sometimes people go out and try to solve a very big problem without kind of breaking it down, and they think they need a lot of different champions, right? So just starting small and making each step just meaningful, and then understanding what success looks like, right? If you don't know where you're going and you don't know what that destination looks like, well, you're never going to hit it, right? And then always be prepared to be flexible and adjust, right? You know, storms come up, you have to take your sails down. You know, the wind's behind you, you need to put your sails up. So you just have to be flexible to adjust in the program based on, what you see and what you measure.
And how big of an impact does the company culture have on deploying a security champion program?
It does. I mean, no, the culture does impact it, right? And that's where, like, you could take one company's culture, and it's not like programs themselves will change and vary and be customized based on the culture, right? And I think that's where you have to be flexible. I could sit in here today and say, you need to do all these things. That may work for one company, but it may not work for a smaller company, right? So you have to think about geographic locations. You have to think about the number of employees, small companies to medium-sized to big companies, and then just the general philosophy of the company and what they're trying to drive. They factor all into how you build it out.
But I think you touched upon like a little bit of like all the rest of the questions that I had. So maybe just dig a little deeper. When we're talking about, the type of folks you're like that we aim for to be these security champions, like, do we aim for engineers, or do we aim for people that are enthusiastic about, security? Or, I mean, if we're trying to change culture and support all the security initiatives of the company, like who do we go after? And when we do get them, how do we like incentivize them so that they keep wanting to be part of the program or grow, continue to grow the program themselves?
I think one of the key things is, and it just happens by default until you build up a community base, is nobody wants to be told to do something, right, if they're not passionate about it. So naturally, there needs to be some level of seed where there's a level of interest into security and growing and understanding more in that domain. And in addition to that, when I think about that particular individual, we often look at technical skills, right? So they obviously need to have technical aptitude, but soft skills are really important. Having somebody who is super interested in security, who is influential, right, and demonstrates strong communication and leadership skills and is well respected within their organization is going to help. They're going to be the gardeners, Lisa, right? They're going to go plant the seeds will be there, they'll water, plant it, and nurture it, right? And I think that's one of the most important, parts in incentivizing, is that mentorship, that coaching, and also that level of award and recognition, right? And then obviously the engagement aspect of it continually. When I think about watering the seed with the champions, it's about the engagement, it's about the recognition, it's about the mentoring, right? It's
right,
about
but
making.
Is it enough just to get, like, what kind of recognition? Is it like, do we give swag, or do we give like, recognition that we call them and have a title as a part of their performance goals? Like, where do we go from there, or what's the depth that we could do to acknowledge it?
So I think we need to take, sometimes when you look at recognition, there's appreciation and recognition, and they're inherently different, right? So yes, recognition, we can go in, we can give, awards, incentives, swag, we can even, give a little bit of a bonus, do a good job. But I think there's also the appreciation aspect, because recognition in itself is a state of time, but constant appreciation is something that you grow, right? And they'll feel constantly valued, right, in what they're doing. And so other things that you can do is obviously put it into own personal development goals as well, right? Because if that person is interested and that's a path that they want to develop, they're going to be more vested in it as well.
So when you think about where you're working now, what's your gut feeling? How many folks do you feel like are doing it because they want to do it versus that they have to do it? Or, I'm just curious what your gut tells you. Like, do you feel like they're like, hey, security's hot and new? And well, I would say new is really a weird word to say because security is really old, but in some people's head, it's like a new
Josh
thing.
takes that personally.
Poor Josh. What are your thoughts on that?
So whether people like to do it, are they really doing it? I think I've seen a mix. There's people that really are enthusiastic and they want to get into the space because they're generally fascinated about it, right? They hear about the pipeline attacks, they hear about banks going down, they hear about breaches. I mean, this is something that maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe 15, 10, 5, who knows, wasn't so heavily, prevalent in the news. But now in the last 5, maybe to 10 years, that's just all we hear. We hear it more every day, on a day-to-day basis. And it's impactful to our lives, right? When my mom says that, she has to reset her passwords because, a bank was potentially breached because of X, Y, and Z, that's a direct impact on our lives. And so I think people are starting to realize, although I think it's already exists, it's just become a lot more, the spotlight's on it. People are definitely more, when they come, they really are enthusiastic about understanding more about the role, because they generally want to make secure products. Like, they generally want to deliver the best experience possible for our customers. And I do think there's those others that are simply, it's maybe they're not interested. So it's a mix. It really is.
Good.
Security also pays. If you are a senior security engineer, you automatically ratchet up potentially tens of thousands of dollars on your resume. You command that respect because the majority of developers and software engineers don't have that expertise.
Well, and think about it, right? You're right. This could be an in for some people that are wanting to know about security programs. Actually, one of my managers who reports to me, who started off as a security champion, and now he's a senior manager of our security engineering team. So,
and that,
yeah. You're exactly right. And I mean, and when we see the statistics, I think New York Times said it, 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs unfilled. I feel like I say that a lot, but that's the reality. Like, this could be their in, this could be your in, whoever's watching, right? Maybe to start off as a security champion and understand the program. So yeah, I'm curious. Crob, I think you
I did have a question, Lisa.
Go ahead. I'm thinking you had a question, and I
did.
interrupted you like usual.
So when you're thinking about these security wizards, what type of training do these people need to go through to get that wizard certification?
Wow, training. Pretty broad question, again, back to the problem, right? But that you want to solve. So when we think about security champions and building, software that we want to, or secure software that our customers want to buy, we have to look about, all the secure development activities that need to be performed. So you think about, okay, let's start off with maybe the requirements. Let's think about, design, threat modeling. Let's think about going into, coding, like secure code reviews, right? Static code analysis. So you keep going down that, scanning, right? And being able to kind of parse through the data, right? All that false positives. So they need to be trained on the end-to-end SDL process, or secure development lifecycle process, right? And understand all of these activities, right? The intent of it, the tools, how you parse the data, all that good stuff. But in addition to that, in most cases, depending on the company, you may have like a gated checklist. Like, before you ship, you may need to do X, Y, and Z, and make sure that you adhere to, whatever SDL, maybe an SDL assessment, for example. And so they have to be well versed in kind of looking through that, understanding it, calling out red flags, understanding risk escalations, understanding how to translate really, security risk into business risk, right? That's one of the advantages of having them sitting in the engineering teams, because they understand that. Then, they also have to understand the latest technology coming down the pipeline, right? Secure REST APIs, Kubernetes, who knows, another year or 2 years, it will probably be, ML, AI, right? And so, and then also there's that cultural piece. 2 years, I'm behind the curve. And then the other thing is being able to kind of train the trainer, right? Train their own organization. So they definitely need to be trained. And there's so many different ways to train, right? To be able to kind of meet those overall objectives.
I'm going to
course,
Lisa you
coding.
for a second. Thinking, you mentioned tools and a lot of process and stuff. From your experience, these security champions, how are there any kind of techniques that you would recommend to make them more successful? Like, Are they always successful if they bring in a big, awesome tool like a Coverity code scanner and dump it on the development? Is that a great path forward for a champion?
Am I
Okay.
Or is it better to
Maybe.
integrate things into
No.
that team's workflow, which is why you're curating the champions that understand how development's done there?
I think you might have read the How to Make Enemies and Upset People book.
I've done this
especially
shit
in
for 20 years.
SPL, right?
I know, Tanya. This is my world. She speaks my language. She's my people.
Yeah, if if you're sitting and you're trying to do something and you have to, go here to get this information you need, then the viability of training is going to fail, right, miserably. It has to be where the developers are working. It has to be in the tools that they're using. But the other thing that people forget sometimes with training, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, actually. It's like we talk constantly about you need to know how to do, secure code review and secure coding. But you're absolutely right. When we get a new tool coming in, right, a tool is only going to be effective as a person that has to adopt it, right, or use it. And so sometimes we forget how to actually comprehensively train on processes as well as tools, right?
Cool. Thank you.
So
I saw Katie had a question. I'm sorry I interrupted, Katie. I was very rude.
No, it's okay. So I hear like training, and I feel like, the security champion is kind of a extension. They're like the embedded ally of the security team, right? Into almost kind of like an organic like sleeper cell, if you will, into the engineering team, to help kind of be that ally in the engineering team and in the product team. And I wonder about, like, we talk about training the security professionals, but I wonder if you had any advice for cross-training the engineers. Like, what about the engineering teams? Like, should we be training them in security, and how could we do that?
So Katie, at the start, I called out that the security champion is responsible for driving. Doesn't mean that they have to do everything. And that's kind of like a false perception, right? They know how to do it, but their job is to kind of make sure it gets done by guiding the team. So if you don't kind of provide that another level of training to the engineering teams, it's going to be very hard to kind of make sure that business problem that you're trying to solve from a security perspective gets solved, right? So engineers and security champions absolutely have to speak the same lingo, right? So that starts off with basic security fundamentals, right? So we understand what threat modeling is. We understand what all of these secure development activities are. Then the other thing is being able to know how to do them, right? Because you could have, as I said, an engineer that may do static code analysis and review the results and need to be trained on false positives, right? The security champion is there to guide and mentor in the ideal world, right? So absolutely, they have to be trained. And it's not even just the developers, actually. When you think about product managers, right? For a program,
train those guys.
For a program to work effectively, right, you need all the entities that are supporting that function to understand what they're trying to support and what it means to them, right?
Testify, sister.
Amen.
How do you enforce all that, though? How do you make sure that everybody go do this?
Security's everybody's job.
Exactly. There you go. Amen.
Is it my job?
Security is everyone's job. Enforcement, that word always scares me, right? Because, when I hear enforce, it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to go to jail if I don't do it.
I remember me and Crob are fighting.
To enforce it, obviously, it needs executive buy-in, across all the different business units. Writing it into a standard policy is important to make sure it gets adopted. And then, you have to make sure that if you're trying to manage that, right, you have to have an effective way to measure out who's taking the training. And it's not just, when I think about enforcing security training, right, training comes in so many different, variations. That's why we have, professionals that go to university to become educators, right? So you have the computer-based training aspect of it. And so when I think about enforcement and I think about CBT type training, we want to be careful sometimes in how we position things, because we don't want training to kind of be that checklist, like, okay, let me play, go away and not pay attention. So somewhere in this training program, you have to also make sure you build in the capability to not only demonstrate your knowledge, right? But you also have to make sure you demonstrate the ability to be able to perform those activities as well. And
yeah, I mean, you keep touching. It's amazing, Tania. You keep touching upon these topics and like hit them really, really quick, which is great. When we talk about success, you know, okay, let's go past enforcement, but we want to measure success. We want to be able to advertise like, hey, look at what you guys did. You did this training. You have this many security champion programs. Like, how do you go about and measure it? Do you establish KPIs? Do you like give stats to people? Like, how do you do that?
So you can obviously measure the percentage of your community that's trained, right? Who have actually taken the training, and you can also measure coverage of security champions, right? So how many, you know, when you think about all the things that you may ship or build, what percentage of coverage do you have, right? And then when you look at that picture, you have to then kind of take a broader picture of, you know, to really understand how effective are they in accomplishing these tasks, right? And so when I look at that, it's like, do we see more or less vulnerabilities coming in, right? From a PSIRT perspective, do we see, are things getting better or worse as part of the development life cycle, like in terms of, you know, vulnerabilities that we're finding, right? And I think sometimes we try to isolate these things into separate parts, right? Which doesn't really give us a true representation, which is really, we need to measure the overall program of how all these pieces fit together between the champion, the training, as well as what you're finding in SDL in terms of things being run, or tooling being run, findings being reported, how many things are being fixed, how many things are not being fixed, in addition to the PSIRT data. So all of that needs to come together really to measure the effectiveness of it. And then you can always have those other KPIs that would say, okay, this percentage of the community here are trained, right? This percentage of the community, we have coverage. And then you tie that with the other data to build that big picture. So, because I think without that, it's very hard to measure the impact of your champions or the effectiveness of the program. I can certainly say, oh, well, guess what? We're making a difference in training because we're seeing less vulnerabilities. But you could turn around and say to me, hey, but Tania, I've just made 15 process improvements in our PSIRT, you know, process that's improving it. so
we never had this conversation at all.
So we have to make sure all those pieces come together, right? And holistically we look at it, right? And we have a way to measure the maturity of our champions in that picture that we create.
What do you think about ELOCs, errors per lines of code? Is that a good metric or a bad metric?
It depends if it's legacy or not, right?
It's a bullshit metric.
I was gonna say, it felt like a trick question.
I was leading the witness, sir.
Yeah.
But no, I like your perspective on metrics. It's holistic. You're measuring the whole program. There's a lot of different factors because it takes a village to make a product or an offering. So it is a lot of different aspects to measuring it. I like the approach you just described. And ELOCs is crap.
Yeah, I just think as well, when you take that as well, even just looking at code level stuff, it's too granular, right? You need to kind of figure all the interdependencies between everything.
If you think about 70% of modern commercial software is open source, you don't have a single developer. So you have a melange of developers. So there's ELOCs is a poor measurement because you don't know who wrote what.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when you bring third-party, components up as well, right? Oddly enough, right? Because you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So, hopefully your supply chain controls are strong enough to make sure that what you're putting in, right? Because the champions to some degree have no control over that other than to point out if they're slow to fix things, if they're not delivering, if there's out of, support components being embedded.
So I'm going to take the last question here, because I know you well enough, and I know that you always like to put yourself out of business here. So with the Security Champion program, how do you get it so that it could finally be in like maintenance mode, that you're like overseeing it, but very lightly, that it's sort of running itself? Like, how do you envision that? Like, what is your strategy? And, what do you think you're going to have to do to get to that point?
Whoa, Lisa, that's like the $1 million question, right?
I know.
It's
that's why I took it.
Well,
I was
what
like,
is
it's great.
what is the question, like with, what was it, like Henry Ford, right? That when people asked him what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So I'm a bit of a idealist that, you have to kind of push yourself to think outside of the box, right? So here's kind of my view on it, as much as it's crazy, and it's a pretty idealistic view. Do I believe they can run by themselves? Yes, right? And I always kind of go back to a good old American franchise, right? That was founded in 1940. Do you know what it is?
1940?
1940. Come on, guys.
McDonald's.
Yes.
Oh,
you got
nice,
it.
Crob. Good job.
So
we really didn't practice that, just so y'all know.
when they find it McDonald's in 1940, right? Would you think, like, how many years, like in 2021, right, which is where we're at right now, they would have almost 40,000 stores all over the world, right? And that works on a franchise. So somehow they found an ingredient that would work, where they pull all these pieces together. And by the way, when you go to Quebec, their McDonald's sell different food, right, than the one in the US, right? You get poutine, you get like these amazing, like different types of pastries. Yeah. So I do believe that when you take that kind of analogy, I think that it is possible to build out a framework or a franchise within a company that different business units can then take and adopt, and you support, and they can customize it, because then they can run it themselves, right? And you support them in some of the key foundational places, like, or pieces like, the enrollment. You can help customize the, potentially the training, right? Or they can create their own training, right? They can maybe do crowdsourced training within their own organization if they have that level of expertise, right? So when you think about all the key pieces that keep a program going, it still comes back to the basic fundamentals. You have to have a place to enroll. You have to have a way to enable them so they know how to do the job. All of that's going to be customizable, right? Based on the business unit, right? And then in addition to that, they can build out their own engagement strategy. So just really providing the tools and techniques to be able to make that happen, I think it is possible, or at least that's my vision. I believe it is.
No, I think it's a great vision. I feel like I've heard someone else tell me about the vision where it keeps going and growing itself.
Write this down for your review.
Yeah.
Lisa said I was great.
Oh, Tania is great. That's why we invited her on the show. All good. No, I do actually think that. I think that it could get to the state where it's like maintaining itself, growing itself, and that, the champions of today are the leaders of tomorrow for the next level of champions. So it's so exciting. It's such a great way to expand what we do into the business units and make them be the advocates, because I sometimes feel like we're the ones telling them what to do all the time, but when they hear it from someone within their organization, within their product line, within their engineering team, it makes such a difference. So awesome work, Tania. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think sometimes we make the word security so scary, right? It's like this big scary, like, woo. But when you just even bring it down to just basics, like, with your kids, and just ask them, hey, how do you, how would you break into the house, right? And they'll figure out ways to do that. And I think developers need to start getting that concept. And I think, going back to your point, the best way for that to happen is for them to take ownership over it, but provide them this little happy bundle, right, where they can take it and go for it, right? So yeah, I'll keep you posted. We'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you, Tania, for joining us on our podcast, and hope everybody enjoyed learning about Security Champions' important role within any security program, and look forward to you all joining us next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.